In the last episode of this series, we saw Joe Weatherly take his first Cup Series championship over Richard Petty. So today, we're going to see if Weatherly can defend his title or if we will have a new champion. In 1963, we only had 4 full-time drivers: Richard Petty, defending champion Joe Weatherly, Jimmy Pardue, and Ned Jarrett. In the first 11 races, only one full-time driver won a race, and that would be Richard Petty. Petty went on to win races at Tampa, Spartanburg, and Weaverville. After the opening 11 races, Richard Petty, the 1962 runner-up, was now in the points lead over the defending champion, Joe Weatherly. Over the course of the next 11 races, Richard Petty would dominate and win 4 races, including 3 in a row at Martinsville, North Wilkesboro, and Columbia. And with Petty running extremely well, he now had a sizable 187-point lead over Ned Jarrett. At Darlington, Petty finished 3rd and Jarrett finished 20th, growing the gap to 259 points. At Manassas, Petty won the race and Jarrett finished 2nd, growing the gap to 269 points. At Richmond, the roles would be reversed and Jarrett would win and Petty would be the one finishing in 2nd, closing the gap to 259 points. At Charlotte, Jarrett finished 30th and Petty finished 36th, closing the gap to 247 points. At Birmingham, Petty won the race while Jarrett finished 4th, extending the gap to 272 points. At Atlanta, Jarrett finished 10th and Petty finished 8th, slightly closing the gap to 265 points. At Daytona, Jarrett finished 5th and Petty finished 8th, closing the gap to 252 points. At Myrtle Beach, Jarrett won the race and Petty finished 15th, shrinking the gap to 190 points. At Savannah, Jarrett won the race again and Petty finished 15th, closing the gap to 128 points. At Moyock, Jarrett finished 2nd and Petty finished 11th, closing the gap to 78 points. At Winston-Salem, Jarrett finished 2nd and Petty finished 8th. And now, a little after the halfway mark of the season, we had a close-fought battle between Ned Jarrett and Richard Petty. At Asheville, Ned Jarrett won and Petty finished 2nd, closing the gap to 40 points. At Old Bridge, Jarrett finished 4th and Petty finished 16th, and this gave Ned Jarrett the point lead by 5 points. At Bridgehampton, Richard Petty took the lead back by 38 points with a win, while Jarrett finished 8th. At Bristol, Petty finished 2nd and Jarrett finished 25th, growing the gap to 125 points. Fast forward 2 races to Nashville, Richard Petty finished 4th while Ned Jarrett finished 7th, and the gap was now 149 points. At Columbia, Petty would win while Jarrett finished 4th, and the gap was now 174 points. At Weaverville, Petty finished 2nd while Jarrett finished 9th, growing the gap to 206 points. At Spartanburg, Jarrett won the race while Petty finished 2nd and slightly shrunk the gap to 196 points. At Winston-Salem, Petty finished 2nd and Jarrett finished 5th, growing the gap to 211 points. At Huntington, Jarrett finished 4th and Petty finished 10th. And now with 11 races to go, we had 2 drivers both going for their first championship. At the Southern 500 at Darlington, Petty finished 12th and Ned Jarrett finished 21st, growing the gap to 217 points. At Hickory, Jarrett finished 14th and Petty finished 15th, closing the gap to 209 points. At Richmond, Jarrett would win the race while Petty finished 6th, and the gap was now 179 points. At Martinsville, Petty finished 5th and Jarrett finished 19th, growing the gap to 228 points. At Moyock, Jarrett won while Petty finished 4th, closing the gap to 203 points. At North Wilkesboro, Jarrett finished 5th while Petty finished 26th, closing the gap to 134 points. At Randleman, Petty won while Jarrett finished 9th, extending the gap to 176 points. At Charlotte, Petty finished 6th while Jarrett finished 32nd, growing the gap to 252 points. At South Boston, Richard Petty won the race while Jarrett would not participate, and this would be enough for Richard Petty to lock up the championship 2 races early over Ned Jarrett. So in 1963, Richard Petty would claim his first championship. Ned Jarrett would put up a heck of a fight, but Petty just simply outran him. And also, the real-life champion Joe Weatherly was not even a part of the championship conversation, and instead of Weatherly claiming his 2nd consecutive championship, Richard Petty would claim his first. Well, that'll do it for today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week for the 1964 season.